Good morning. My name is Aaron Snow. I'm a student at Columbia Law School, and I can't wait to tell my kids that I danced at Janet Reno's dance party. My father once told me that the more respected the speaker, the shorter the introduction. By all rights, I should already be off the stage. Janet Reno was the 78th Attorney General of the United States. She was the first woman ever to hold the office and the longest-serving Attorney General since before the Civil War. Before that, she served for 15 years as State Attorney for Dade County, Florida. She was one of 16 women to graduate in her class of 500 from Harvard Law School. She's been described as part social worker, part crime fighter, equally dogged about both. She's been called a folk hero and a paragon of virtue, tough and demanding, but unendingly fair, fiercely loyal, and perpetually inspiring. On display during her tenure as Attorney General was her singular commitment to protecting the innocent while vigorously enforcing the laws. Apropos of this weekend, at her very last press availability as Attorney General, Ms. Reno took a moment to say this: "Consider public service. To defend democracy is sometimes not an easy task. To stand up for the rule of law, to stand up for a government of the people, to defend it, to take criticism for it, is an opportunity. To help people, to make a difference, to make this a better country, is the most rewarding calling that you can pursue." Janet Reno's lifetime of service is the model to which the American Constitution Society aspires. Unyielding honesty, uncomplicated integrity, boundless nobility. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Janet Reno.
Thank you very, very much. I've also gotten called a lot of names. And as my brother points out, it helps to keep me in perspective and keep me in place. It is a great privilege to be here. It's like a reunion of the Justice Department in some respects. After my service at the department, after meeting lawyers across the country, I became more convinced than ever before that I love lawyers, good and caring lawyers, and I love the law. I'd like to speak most directly to the students this morning. Others of you have heard me, but I would like to speak to the students and carry forward on Mr. Snow's comments on public service. I have done billable hours. I have worked in a small firm and struggled to make all the payments. But there is no opportunity that I have had that can compare with public service. It is not the fame, nor certainly the fortune that you make or don't make. It is not always success, because there is loss, there is bitter disappointment mixed with tragedy such as Waco. There are losses of elections, but there is no opportunity that any lawyer could have than to try to use the law the right way to make America safer and freer and to give more people equal opportunity. A lawyer has a special role, and I hope for all of you, as you graduate from law school, that you will find the law has given you as much joy and satisfaction as it has given me. But the law can do some dumb things. And we cannot take its goodness for granted. We must be constantly vigilant We must never give up asking how we can improve the law, because if we stand by and take no action, we watch it slip away. I had the great privilege of welcoming ministers of justice and attorneys general from emerging democracies in Eastern Europe and from other fragile democracies around the world. They came to the beautiful conference room in the Department of Justice. On one wall, high arched ceiling, is a mural of Justice Granted, a hopeful, progressive view of justice with Harlan Fiske Stone as the model for the justice leading people to a sunlit upland. On the other side is Justice Denied, an evil, two-faced picture of justice, with brown-shirted troops leading people off into bondage and taking papers and music from their arms. I would see those people in that conference room so excited about democracy, so excited about what they had done in their nation, and looking to us to find answers as to directions they should take. I would see some again in 6 months or a year, and they would be discouraged, and sometimes out of office, watching their democracy slip away. We cannot take our democracy for granted. It is so fragile. It must be cherished. And what the ACS has done in its brief life to reinstill spirit and enthusiasm amongst all people, but particularly students, has just been so gratifying for me to see. But how can we improve? I would like to spend this morning with you talking about some issues that may not be constitutional in dimension, but are constitutional in heart and soul, because with the Constitution and the appropriate application of the Constitution, we have got to consider the people behind it. Justice O'Connor in the Herrera case in 1993 noted that our society has a high degree of confidence in its criminal trials, in no small part because of the Constitution offers unparalleled protections against convicting the innocent. I have wanted to ask Justice O'Connor what she would think now, after DNA, post-conviction DNA testing, has exonerated over 123 people charged with crimes and convicted of crimes that resulted in the death penalty, a substantial term of years, or a life sentence. And think about it for a moment. Those are just high-profile crimes where DNA was applicable. Think of the cases, large and small, where DNA is not applicable. And we have a wonderful opportunity, a window of opportunity to look to see why innocent people have been convicted. We have got to do that, because the Constitution that ignores these facts is not going to be the Constitution that gives the public confidence in its system. Now, you'd never think of Walter Dellinger as a scientific researcher. But it was Walter Dellinger in my conference room one morning in 1993 who said, I just saw a clipping where it says 16 people have been exonerated. Why don't we do a study of why they were exonerated? That led to a report by the National Institute of Justice. That has led to further study. And it is an example, again, for me, particularly, for Walter Dellinger is one of the great constitutional scholars that I have ever worked with, plus being the greatest dancer, and whoever sees him first, tell him he slipped out on me and he wasn't there to dance last night. But I forgive him, because I think what he started has been one of the most important opportunities that we have ever had to look at why things go wrong. This is the ultimate form of government power. I think first we look at the process. Who first investigates most death penalty or life sentence cases. Police officers, oftentimes who do not have a college degree, oftentimes are not paid very much, oftentimes are not trained, but they investigate one of the most sensitive, complex matters that we can undertake in this country. What training do they have? What requirements do they have to be police officers? Nothing that goes to the issue of memory, nothing that goes to the issue of eyewitness testimony and how reliable it is. And there is also the tendency, once you get the information that says, this is the guy that did it, to put on blinders and just look down a long tunnel saying, how can I get this guy convicted, without looking for the signs on either side of how they got there in the first place. Prosecutors. Prosecutors are sometimes 3 and 4 years out of law school. They again have not had formal training in how we seek the truth, how we find facts. They have a quasi-judicial role at first to determine whether there's probable cause to charge. But having once met that standard, they go forward more as advocates. And here we are in a legal system that eschews conflict. What about the role of that young prosecutor who has limited experience, who's got to be the judge and the advocate all at the same time, and has a family, a grieving family out there, who is sure because somebody said they saw it happen in a certain way that that's the person that did it? We don't approach these cases from that point of view. How do we address these issues? Some people say, well, let the judges do it. But the judges have got to get elected every 4 years, and there's an editorial in the newspaper that says this case has got to go to trial, and we've got to see that justice is done. But if we explained it to people, look, nobody wants to make a mistake. Nobody wants to convict an innocent person because, first of all, if we convict an innocent person, the person who did the crime has gone free and may be a danger to the community. We need to involve victims advocates in our efforts. We need to develop interdisciplinary efforts to support the truth that underlies the Constitution. Law schools have marvelous courses on evidence, but I haven't heard of a law school yet that has memory experts, psychologists, eyewitness testimony, eyewitness identification experts, communications experts, media experts, lawyers, together teaching and talking about how we seek the truth. How do we look for human error? How do we make sure that that fingerprint was done correctly? How do we make sure that we have not mixed up DNA samples? How do we develop protocols like a pilot has that gives people the understanding of what has to be done? I used to think that a confession, if somebody confessed and I was sure that the process had been appropriate, that was enough. That's not even enough now as you look at some of these cases of people exonerated because they feared the death penalty and thought that they better plead and confess. We have got to do far more in reaching out to find the truth. Now, I'm one of these people that says this discussion of finality versus the truth is not constructive. I guess Professor Bator, who I had for administrative law, would find me naive. But by George, if somebody gets killed, you ought to be able to continue to look to see who killed them and make sure you've got the right person, because that's not going to be a matter of judgment. There may be matters of judgment with respect to other factors, but if somebody slashed somebody's throat, we've got to be able to understand that. That is capable of identification if we dig hard enough. And so I raise these issues with you to point out that it's not just the great application of law, it's the application of law to facts. It is using the Constitution, but remembering that the Constitution is worth little more than the paper it's written on unless you have human beings who are trained, who are educated, who are prepared to address the hard issues, and who have a process by which it can be done. There is a second factor with respect to the criminal justice system, and that is fairness. I am personally opposed to the death penalty. It has been one of the great moral dilemmas that I have dealt with as a prosecutor and as Attorney General. I have not had an answer yet to how we can justify the application of the death penalty that results in a disparate impact against minorities. When you look at pre-sentence investigations and death penalty applications that take into account so much but don't take into account the child's life growing up, how can we expect the Constitution to work fairly if we do not provide our children with basic health care, with early childhood programs that make a difference, or education programs that make a difference? I come to the ACS, I talk with constitutional scholars, and they talk to me about affirmative action in college and law school. But what about talking about affirmative action for the American people from the get-go, not to create dependency or develop welfare programs, but to develop self-sufficiency and the capacity to deal with these issues? And we have got to do far more. I don't know about your jurisdiction, but I have heard enough from jurisdictions across this country to know that our public schools are in danger. We have a situation in Florida where the school and the number of years required to graduate is being reduced and electives are being eliminated as a voluntary effort. We have a system in Florida where corporations can make contributions to private schools and get appropriate tax credits. Those contributions have no public accountability attached to them. They are at this point non-public records. Our schools face greater challenges than in any time in our history. The amount of knowledge that exists in this world staggers the imagination and converts vanity to prayer, as Adlai Stevenson would say. Computers bring us knowledge at our doorsteps. But what is right? What is true? How do we work through it? Lawyers are going to have to be involved in making the public school system in this country once again excellent for all our students, not just for some of our students. I will never forget the day that Brown versus Board of Education came down. We heard about it on the radio. The next morning I got the paper, and it was so exciting to read and to believe that it could really happen. But if you look at minority schools in this country today, they are not equal. They are not providing the same type of education. If our Constitution is to mean something, then surely we can devise a way of providing equal education for all our children, regardless of where they come from, what color they are, what language they speak, whether they have a disability or not. We can give them the opportunity to be their best in a cost-effective way. But it's not going to be great constitutional principles that solve this. It's going to be equality, but how do we get it? How do we reach out through almost every state legislature in this country, which is amongst the groups having to deal with budget crises? How do we dismantle large accretions to the public school system that have weighed it down and start over again? It's almost like the difference between one of the old airlines and the new airlines. How do we build a new, good, responsive public school system that can provide what the people need in this country today? How do we make education relevant to that young man who's as smart as he can be but bored out of his mind because nobody has showed him anything that's interesting in education, and he wants to find out about X, Y, and Z, and if given half a chance, he could be so much more than he is. That's where we as lawyers have responsibilities. You say, but teachers do that. There is no other profession in the world that cuts across so many lines in terms of building, creating, constructing as lawyers do. But none of this is going to be worth much if we continue to have a nation that lets some people have health care and some people not have health care. We are the richest nation in the world, the strongest, most powerful nation in the world. We have spent vast dollars trying to do something for a nation halfway around the world, and hopefully we'll spend some more dollars for Afghanistan. But we are a nation that watches children go without appropriate health care. We are a nation that watches people with disabilities who could be so much more effective and involved and have access to so much more go without because we have failed to develop a health care system that can make a difference. What is the answer? We have seen the struggles with regards to health care. I don't think they're going to be solved in the courtroom. They're ultimately going to be solved in the legislature. But we need to come together in an objective, fact-finding way with some of the partisan politics and the partisan rhetoric peeled away from our discussion to find out how we can do this. And I think both with respect to the public schools, with respect to health care, with respect to the protection of our environment, we're going to have to look to the American university system to provide a partnership and an opportunity to do research that can be applied in real senses. I run into academicians who say, don't like applied research. One of them was candid enough to tell me he didn't like it because he might be proven wrong. Others attributed their dislike of it to the fact that they had to focus on tenure. But the work being done in America's universities is so exciting. I've had a chance to visit a large number, large and small, in the last 2 years. And I'm excited about the research, excited about the thought that's going on. It is so refreshing to hear it done and talked about without political bent and mind. We have got to take this nation's knowledge, this nation's capacity, and come up with solutions that can make a difference, because our Constitution doesn't mean much to a person who cannot enjoy it because he does not have the health that gives him the chance to live in a way that he can enjoy it. The next issue has attracted much discussion here. But our role and our challenge right at the moment is going to be, how can we carry the issue of national security versus civil liberties forward so that we convince other Americans and spread the word? When I first started talking about this, people said, you'd better hush up or the wrath of God will descend upon you. Nothing happened. I was fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been in the seat of the Attorney General. I have looked at the Alfred Murrah building. on television that morning of April the 19th, 1995, and thought, how can I protect this nation? How do I find this person? How do I prevent what others may be doing in other places right now to plan for something similar? It is an awesome responsibility and an extraordinary position to be in. And I think instincts are right to do that, but at the same time, to try to keep the balance and to walk through those issues as carefully as possible. The immediate moment may bring a tip in favor of national security, but after almost 2 years, when we've had plenty of time to think about it and look at it, we ought to be able to devise a system that balances and maintains and protects our civil liberties as compared to our national security. I think it is going to be important for us all to try to get as much information as we can. People have been critical of the American press for getting itself embedded, for not asking follow-up questions in press conferences. But in many respects, the American press has done a good job of trying to ferret out some of the answers. But it is time the administration became accountable. It is time that an administration explains why it locks up one man in a brig incommunicado without being charged, without having contact with lawyers, and tries another one in a federal court. It is time that they explain why they lock up somebody in a brig. Is it so he can talk? Well, why arrest him on a material witness bond and have a press conference announcing his arrest if you don't want him shown to the light of day? Let's start explaining to the American people why we are doing these things so we can take appropriate action to show that these are either unnecessary or that there may be, for some unknown reason, a reason for tipping the scales. I believe if we operate in good faith, if we believe in the American people, we can make an extraordinary difference. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I don't see how that government can remain as such if one branch of government does what it thinks is right without giving opportunities for others to check it. I think if America's government is to work, it requires that Congress take appropriate action, that Congress take appropriate responsibility, that the courts do not defer, because there is too much opportunity for mistake. We have seen it in the issue of war. Why can't Congress declare war in a formal, sensible way with the President submitting to Congress why the war should be declared and putting it on paper so everybody can understand? Why, if enemy combatant is an important term, why can't Congress define it and decide what should and shouldn't be done after appropriate debate? If somebody can be tried in federal court, why can't other people be tried in federal court? And what is it? Is it because of what the Secretary of Defense said, that we've got to get as much information as we can? That is a rather ominous comment when you put it in the context of somebody held incommunicado. Let us keep demanding the answers and start a drumbeat of answers, of questions across this country about what is going on with our liberties. We may not have success in courts, but if we keep up the drumbeat, the voices will be heard across this country. And we have got to put it in terms that people can understand. They say that's not my problem. But explain to them, what happened if you went to see your grandmother and she lived next door to a man who was plotting to do something terrible to the country, and you stopped to talk to him unknowing that what his involvement was, and the next day the federal officials were at your door saying that you had had a meeting with so-and-so. They wouldn't tell you what, but picked you up and took you away and held you on a material witness bond, but then decided to put you in a military brig. Put it in terms they can understand. Otherwise, we will continue to stand by and watch our liberties erode. But in all of this, I asked if there had been much discussion at this convention about the districting processes for state legislatures and congressional districts across the country. The Texas Democrats are taking the lead in this issue. But we can't play revolving doors between Tallahassee and Austin, and we have got to make our districting process one that people can understand, one that does not improperly dilute the voices across a state. If we do not, we will change the constitutional structure of this nation for good, and it will be nigh on impossible to undo it. It is going to require that we are all thoughtful, that we look at the facts and get the hard data about how we can make each approach as fair as possible. I don't have the answers, but I'm convinced that we must work together to start to find these answers. And we must work together. I sometimes wonder whether it will take a depression to address finally the issue of campaign financing. But I think what it will do, what it will take, is a commitment to grassroots politics that we haven't seen in a long time. And we can do it better than ever before. We have a better chance of doing it with the internet and with the opportunity to organize around this country, both in terms of informational organization, in terms of grassroots organization, better than ever before. It is possible. When I came into this hotel last night, the enthusiasm was palpable. You could reach out and touch it. We have got to take this enthusiasm out to our homes, to our schools, to our churches, across this country, and say, we have such a wonderful opportunity to make a difference, but we cannot stand by. Some people say it just seems so overwhelming, and I hear some, but it's not. Some of you have heard the story, but a number have said that it helped. When I was 8 years old, we lived in a little wooden house. We didn't have enough money to build a bigger house, but there were 4 children a year apart, and we were outgrowing the little wooden house. One afternoon, my mother announced that she was going to build a house. And we said, what do you know about building a house? And she said, I'm going to learn. And she went to the brick mason and to the plumber and to the electrician, and she learned how to build a house. She came home, dug the foundation with her own hands, put in the plumbing and the electricity. My father helped her with the heavy work when he came home from work at night. And she and I lived in that house until she died just before I went to Washington. That house was a symbol to me as I came down the driveway at night with a knotty problem to solve, that you can do anything you really want to if it's the right thing to do and you put your mind to it. That house taught me another lesson in August of '92 when Hurricane Andrew hit the area head on. My mother was old and frail and dying, but she got up as the winds reached a feverish howl, sat down in her chair, folded her hands. She was totally unafraid, for she knew how she had built that house. She'd put in the right materials. She'd built it the right way. She had not cut corners. When we went out the next morning, the world looked like a World War I battlefield, but the house had only lost one shingle and some screens. We can approach all these issues, how we build our schools, how we address the issue of equity in health care, how we protect the civil liberties of this nation, how we avoid going to war on casual comments made without much foundation, how we can build a nation that cherishes every single individual and gives to each the opportunity to be the best that they can. We can do it with the enthusiasm in this room, with the spirit that's here. Let's go do it.